My daughter-in-law hid my son's letters after he died overseas. 2 years later, I found them in her attic. I pretended not to understand what I was holding at first. The dust-covered box sat between old Christmas decorations and a broken floor lamp, tucked so far into the corner of the attic that no one would have found it by accident. My hands were trembling before I even opened it. Maybe some part of me already knew. The first envelope had my name written across the front in my son's handwriting. Mom! Just that one word nearly stopped my heart. I smiled softly to myself. Then I sat down on the attic floor and opened the letter with shaking fingers. What I discovered that afternoon shattered the last 2 years of my life. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and tell me what city you're watching from, Sam. Sometimes I still can't believe how far grief can travel before the truth finally catches up to it. The attic smelled like cedar wood, old paper, and summer heat trapped beneath the roof. Outside, rain tapped gently against the gutters of Sabrina's house while I sat frozen beneath a dangling light bulb, holding the first real words my son had spoken to me in 2 years. 2 years since Caleb died overseas. 2 years since the folded flag. 2 years since the closed casket. 2 years since Sabrina stood beside me in black gloves and dark sunglasses, holding my arm while reporters from the local paper photographed grieving families outside the memorial service. Caleb loved you so much, she had whispered that day. Now, I wondered how many lies had already passed through those lips by then. I unfolded the letter carefully. The paper was soft at the creases, worn from being handled before it was hidden away. Mom, if you're reading this, then the mail system finally decided to cooperate for once. You wouldn't believe this place. Dust storms every morning. Coffee so strong it could remove paint from a truck. I covered my mouth as tears filled my eyes. It sounded exactly like him. Not the polished version people spoke about at memorials. Not the framed photograph in his dress uniform sitting on my mantel. This was my real son. Funny, warm, alive. For 2 years, I had believed Caleb stopped writing near the end. That was what Sabrina told me after the funeral. He became very private out there, she'd said gently while helping me clean dishes after the service. I think the work changed him. And because grief makes fools of trusting people, I believed her. I believed every careful explanation, every softened excuse, every sympathetic smile. I swallowed hard and continued reading. I miss Sunday mornings at your house. I miss your pancakes. I even miss that old clock in your kitchen that wakes people up before sunrise. A shaky laugh escaped my throat. That clock had annoyed Caleb since he was 12 years old. I could suddenly picture him standing barefoot in my kitchen again, stealing bacon from the frying pan, while pretending not to. For one impossible second, the grief lifted. Then I noticed the date at the top of the page. 16 days before he died. My chest tightened. 16 days, which meant he had written to me right up until the end. I stared at the stack of envelopes inside the box. There had to be 30 of them, maybe more. Some still sealed, some bundled together with twine. A few carried military shipping labels and customs stamps. My fingers turned cold. Sabrina told me there were only 3 letters. 3. I remembered sitting at her dining room table after the funeral while she handed them to me, carefully, almost ceremonially. These were the only ones we found, she'd said. At the time, I had thanked her. The rain outside grew heavier. I looked around the attic, slowly, suddenly feeling like I was sitting inside someone else's secret. Old storage bins lined the walls, plastic tubs labeled fall decor, tax files, kids' clothes. Everything looked ordinary, but grief teaches you something strange. The worst betrayals rarely happen in dramatic moments. They happen quietly. At kitchen tables, inside whispers conversations, in boxes, hidden beneath old holiday decorations. I picked up another envelope. This one had never been opened. Neither had the next. Or the next. My breathing became shallow as realization settled over me piece by piece, like snow quietly burying a road overnight. Sabrina hadn't forgotten these letters. She hadn't misplaced them. She had hidden them. All of them. A loud burst of laughter drifted up from downstairs. Ava and Mason were watching television in the living room. I could hear Sabrina moving around in the kitchen below me, unloading groceries, as if this were any normal Thursday afternoon. As if my entire world hadn't just cracked open above her head. I pressed the letters against my chest and closed my eyes. For 2 years, I thought my son slowly stopped loving me before he died. For 2 years, I replayed our last phone call, wondering if I had said something wrong. For 2 years, I blamed war zones, trauma, distance, exhaustion. I built excuses for a silence Caleb never chose. And all along, his words had been sitting 10 feet above my head, waiting. My eyes drifted toward the final envelope at the bottom of the box. Unlike the others, this one was marked in red ink. For Mom only. My hands began trembling again, because suddenly, deep down, I knew. Whatever was inside that final letter was the real reason Sabrina hid all the others. I didn't open the last letter right away. I just sat there on the attic floor with the box beside me, listening to the rain hit the roof above my head. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, not from fear exactly. From the strange feeling that my son had somehow reached across death itself just to tell me the truth. Downstairs, I heard Sabrina calling to Mason about washing his hands before dinner. Normal sounds. Ordinary sounds. But nothing felt ordinary anymore. I carefully placed the red-marked envelope back into the box and wiped my eyes with the sleeve of my sweater. I needed time to think before reading it. Because once I opened that final letter, there would be no pretending anymore. No more excuses. No more comforting lies. I climbed down from the attic slowly, carrying only 3 of the letters hidden beneath my cardigan. The rest stayed in the box exactly where I found them. I don't know why. Maybe some part of me still couldn't accept what Sabrina had done. The kitchen smelled like garlic and rosemary chicken when I walked in. Sabrina stood at the counter, rinsing vegetables beneath warm water, her blonde hair tied neatly back like always. Calm, controlled, beautiful in that polished suburban way that made people trust her immediately. She looked over her shoulder and smiled. "Did you find the Christmas lights?" For one terrifying second, I thought I might collapse right there in the kitchen. Because suddenly, I realized something horrible. She had no idea I'd found the letters. And the woman smiling at me had spent 2 years watching me grieve without saying a word. I forced myself to smile back. "They were farther back than I remembered," I said quietly. My voice sounded strangely normal. That frightened me too. Sabrina nodded and turned back to the sink. "That attic is a disaster. One of these days, we should really clean the whole thing out. Clean it out." I looked at her hands. Smooth, manicured nails. Her wedding ring catching the kitchen light. The same hands that had handed me 3 carefully selected letters after Caleb died. The same hands that hid the rest. Ava wandered into the kitchen, holding her phone. At 14, she had Caleb's eyes exactly. Every time she looked at me, it felt like losing him all over again. "Grandma, are you staying for dinner?" she asked. Before I could answer, Sabrina spoke lightly from the counter. "She probably wants to get home before the storm gets worse. Probably, as if the decision had already been made for me." I watched Ava glance awkwardly between us before sitting at the kitchen island. She seemed quieter lately. Older somehow. Grief ages children in strange ways too. "I can stay a little while," I said softly. Sabrina smiled again. But something flickered across her face for half a second. Tension. Tension. Uncertainty. Maybe she noticed something different in my voice. Or maybe guilt simply never sleeps completely. Dinner passed in the usual careful silence that had settled over this family since Caleb's death. Plates clinked softly. The television murmured from the living room. Mason talked about a science project involving baking soda volcanoes. And all the while, Caleb's letters rested against my chest beneath my sweater, burning there like hidden truth. At one point, Ava looked up from her plate. "Grandma," she said quietly, "did Dad write to you a lot when he was overseas?" The fork nearly slipped from Sabrina's hand, just for a second. But I saw it. I think Ava saw it too. I swallowed carefully before answering. "He used to," I said. Ava nodded slowly. "Mom says he got distant near the end." Silence settled over the table. Sabrina reached for her water glass without looking at me. "Your father was under a lot of stress, sweetheart." There it was again. The story she'd built. Repeated so many times it almost sounded real. But now every sentence coming out of her mouth felt rehearsed, like lines memorized long ago. I looked down at my plate, suddenly unable to eat another bite, because the truth was beginning to rearrange every memory I had from the past 2 years. The missed birthdays, the unanswered questions, the way Sabrina always stepped in whenever I asked about Caleb's belongings, the way she discouraged me from contacting his coworkers overseas. Even the funeral itself suddenly felt different in my memory. Controlled, managed, carefully filtered. After dinner, I stood by the front door, pulling on my coat, while thunder rolled softly outside. Sabrina handed me an umbrella. "Drive safe," she said gently. Anyone watching us would have seen a caring daughter-in-law, comforting her husband's grieving mother. That was the terrifying part. People like Sabrina survive because they know exactly how kindness is supposed to look. I paused before opening the door. Then I turned toward her for the first time all evening. "Did Caleb ever mention mailing problems overseas?" I asked casually. For the first time since I found the box, real panic flashed across her face. Quick, sharp, gone almost instantly. But I saw it. "Oh, sometimes," she answered carefully. "Why?" I held her gaze for 3 long seconds. Then I smiled softly. "No reason," I said. And for the first time in 2 years, I watched my daughter-in-law become afraid of me. I barely slept that night. The letters sat on my kitchen table long after midnight, while cold rain slid down the windows beside me. I made tea twice and forgot to drink it both times. Every few minutes, I reached for one of Caleb's envelopes, just to touch his handwriting again. It still didn't feel real. For 2 years, I believed silence had separated us before he died. Now I understood something far worse. Someone had separated us on purpose. The house felt painfully quiet. Since Caleb's death, silence had become its own kind of companion. The old refrigerator humming in the kitchen. The ticking wall clock he used to complain about. The heater clicking on during cold nights. Those sounds filled spaces where conversations used to live. I picked up another unopened letter carefully and checked the date. 8 months before Caleb died. My throat tightened. That meant Sabrina had hidden these letters almost from the beginning. Not after the funeral. Not during grief, before. I sat down slowly and opened the envelope. "Mom, you'd laugh if you saw this place."
One of the guys here.
Tried making chili last night and somehow set off the fire alarm in the entire housing unit. A weak smile crossed my face through the tears. That was Caleb. Always noticing small, ridiculous things, even during difficult situations. But halfway through the letter, his tone changed. "I know Sabrina gets frustrated sometimes when I call you so often. She says I worry too much about home. Maybe she's right. But you're my mom. I need to know you're okay." I stopped breathing for a second. The words blurred in front of me. Not because they were dramatic, because they were honest. Simple truths always hurt the deepest. I suddenly remembered a phone call from 3 years earlier. Caleb had been overseas only a few months then. We were talking about Thanksgiving plans when Sabrina grabbed the phone in the background laughing. "Your mother survived before you deployed, Caleb. She'll survive if you miss one phone call." At the time, everyone laughed. Even me. Now the memory sounded different, sharper. I folded the letter carefully and stared into the darkness of my kitchen. Grief changes shape once betrayal enters it. Before, I missed my son. Now I missed the version of my life that I thought had been real. Around 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed softly beside me. A text from Ava. "Grandma, are you awake?" I hesitated before replying. "Yes, sweetheart. Everything okay?" 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, her message came through. "Mom gets weird whenever people mention Dad's old things." I stared at the screen. A minute later, another message arrived. "I think she threw some stuff away after the funeral." My chest tightened. Children notice far more than adults realize. I typed slowly. "Why do you say that?" This time, Ava took longer to answer. "Because I heard her arguing with Dad before he left for his last trip." The kitchen suddenly felt colder. My fingers froze above the phone. "What kind of arguing?" I typed. Again the dots appeared. Dad said, "Stop trying to control everything." I closed my eyes. For a long moment, I couldn't move at all. Because suddenly Caleb's letters weren't the only hidden thing anymore. There had been problems long before he died, cracks beneath the surface. And somehow I had missed all of them. Another text came through. "Please don't tell Mom I texted you." I swallowed hard. "Of course not, sweetheart." Ava sent one final message before going offline. "Dad used to hide letters in the garage too." I stared at those words for a very long time. The garage. Another place Sabrina never wanted me entering alone. Even after Caleb's death, she always found reasons to stop me. "It's too cluttered. There are chemicals everywhere. I'll look for it later." At the time, I thought she was trying to help. Now every memory rearranged itself into something darker. I pushed my chair back from the kitchen table and walked slowly toward the hallway closet where I kept Caleb's old spare key ring. For years, he insisted I keep copies to his house. Just in case, he always said. After his death, Sabrina never asked for them back. Maybe she forgot. Or maybe she never imagined I would stop trusting her. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around myself and stared out the front window into the stormy darkness. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to demand answers, to scream. But another part of me understood something important. The truth only reveals itself completely when people still believe their lies are working. And Sabrina still believed I knew nothing. For now, that was my only advantage. I walked back to the kitchen table and picked up the final unopened envelope marked in red ink. For Mom only. This time, I carefully slid my finger beneath the seal. And as the paper unfolded in my hands, I realized my son had known far more than I ever imagined. My hands shook so badly, I almost tore the envelope opening it. For a long moment, I just stared at Caleb's handwriting again. For Mom only. The kitchen clock ticked softly behind me, while rain continued, tapping against the windows. It was almost 3 in the morning, but exhaustion no longer mattered. Grief had a way of keeping old mothers awake anyway. I unfolded the paper carefully. "Mom, if you're reading this, then something probably went wrong." I stopped immediately. A cold feeling spread through my chest. Not fear, exactly. Recognition. Because deep down, some part of me already knew. This letter was different from the other letters. Caleb's usual warmth was still there in the handwriting, but the tone had changed. The careful humor was gone, the easy comfort. In its place was something heavier, more cautious. I continued reading slowly. "I need you to promise me something before you keep going. Don't ignore your instincts just because you love people. I know you do that. You always have." Tears filled my eyes instantly. That was exactly the kind of thing Caleb used to tell me after his father passed away. He worried about me constantly once I started living alone. Especially after he moved overseas. I swallowed hard and kept reading. Things with Sabrina have been difficult for a while now. I didn't tell you because I thought we could fix it. And because I never wanted you caught in the middle of our marriage problems. I pressed my hand over my mouth. Marriage problems. Sabrina never mentioned any serious issues after his death. Not once. According to her, they were happy. According to her, Caleb had simply become withdrawn because of stress overseas. But now I could hear his real voice in my head. Calm, honest, trying not to worry me even while carrying something painful alone. The letter continued. She gets angry whenever I talk about you too much. At first, I thought it was normal stress. But lately, it feels like she wants distance between us on purpose. I stared at the page. Every memory from the past few years suddenly shifted under a different light. The canceled visits, the shortened holidays, the awkward tension whenever Caleb called me during family dinners. Even Christmas, 2 years before he died. Sabrina insisted they spend it skiing in Colorado instead of visiting me, like they always had before. Caleb called late Christmas night, sounding exhausted. "I'll make it up to you, Mom," he'd said quietly while I stood alone reheating leftovers in my kitchen. At the time, I blamed distance. Marriage, adult life. Now I wasn't so sure anymore. I kept reading. Maybe I'm overthinking things. Maybe deployment stress is messing with my head. But if anything ever happens to me, I need you to know this clearly. You were never a burden to me. The tears finally slipped down my face then, not dramatic sobbing. Just quiet tears rolling onto old paper beneath the kitchen light. Because grieving mothers carry strange guilt. We spend years wondering whether we asked for too much love from our children. Whether we became too dependent, too emotional, too difficult to care for. And for 2 years, Sabrina had quietly fed those fears inside me. Maybe Caleb needed space. Maybe he changed. Maybe he stopped reaching out because life moved on. But none of it had been true. My son loved me until the very end. The letter trembled in my hands as I continued. There are copies of important documents inside the blue file in the garage cabinet. Insurance papers, bank information. Everything should already list you and the kids properly. My heartbeat slowed. Blue file, garage cabinet. Ava's text suddenly flashed through my mind again. Dad used to hide letters in the garage, too. I leaned back slowly in my chair. This wasn't random anymore. Caleb left instructions, specific ones. And somehow Sabrina had managed to place herself between every single thing he intended for me to have. The final paragraph was shorter. Messier too, like he'd written it quickly. If you never receive these letters, Mom, then it means someone made that choice for you. I closed my eyes. There it was. The sentence that changed everything. Not lost mail. Not military delays. Not grief. Choice. Someone had decided a grieving mother did not deserve her son's final words. Outside, thunder rolled across the dark sky. I folded the letter carefully and pressed it against my chest. For a long time, I just there listening to the storm and remembering Caleb as a little boy. Running through sprinklers in our backyard, falling asleep on the couch during old Western movies. Calling me every Mother's Day, no matter where he was in the world. And suddenly, another memory surfaced. 3 months after Caleb's funeral, I asked Sabrina if she had any of his personal notebooks or journals. She answered too quickly. No. He got rid of most private things before his last deployment. At the time, I believed her. Now I realized something terrifying. My daughter-in-law had been rehearsing this lie for years. I looked toward the hallway, where Caleb's spare house keys still hung inside my closet. Then I looked back at the sentence in the letter. Blue file in the garage cabinet. By sunrise, I already knew exactly where I was going next. By the time the sun came up, I had already made my decision. I was going back to Sabrina's house. Not to confront her. Not yet. I wanted to see that garage cabinet first. The storm had passed some time before dawn, leaving the streets wet and silver beneath the pale morning light. I barely noticed the drive across town. Caleb's final letter sat folded inside my purse, beside the spare keys he once insisted I keep. "Emergencies happen, Mom," he used to say. Neither of us imagined the emergency would be his absence. When I pulled into Sabrina's driveway just after 7, the house was still quiet. Her SUV was gone already. Sabrina always dropped the kids off early before heading to her real estate office downtown. That polished life of hers never paused for grief very long. I sat in my car for a moment, staring at the house. 2-story colonial, white shutters, perfect lawn. The kind of home people described as beautiful in Christmas cards. And somehow almost every painful thing in my life now traced back to it. I used Caleb's garage code first, still the same. A wave of sadness hit me unexpectedly at that small detail. Part of me had assumed Sabrina changed everything after he died. But the familiar beep sounded, and the garage door slowly rattled upward, exactly like it always had. The garage smelled faintly of motor oil, cardboard, and cut grass. Caleb's workbench still stood against the far wall. Seeing it nearly broke me. His tools remained organized with the same careful precision he'd used since high school. Screwdrivers hung in labeled rows. Electrical tape stacked neatly inside clear plastic bins. A faded Cleveland Browns mug still sat beside the radio he used while fixing things around the house. For one impossible second, it felt like he might walk through the side door any minute. I stood there quietly, trying to steady myself. Then I remembered why I came. Blue file, garage cabinet. My eyes moved toward the tall metal storage cabinet near the back wall. It was locked. Of course it was. I reached into my purse again and stared down at Caleb's old key ring. There were 6 keys attached to it. House key, mailbox key, small brass shed key. I tried the third one carefully. The cabinet clicked open immediately. A chill ran through me. Inside were neatly stacked folders, tax documents, old manuals, insurance binders. Everything looked untouched, organized, hidden in plain sight. Then I saw it. A blue file folder pushed flat beneath a stack of mortgage papers. My hands turned cold as I pulled it free. Across the front, written in Caleb's handwriting, "For Mom and Kids." I slowly opened it. The first thing inside was a life insurance policy. Beneficiaries listed clearly underneath. Ava Mercer, 35%. Mason Mercer, 35%. Evelyn Mercer, 30%. I stared at my names for several long seconds. Because according to Sabrina, Caleb left everything solely to the children. That was what she told me after the funeral, while sitting across from me at her dining room table. Caleb wanted the kids fully protected, she explained gently. "You understand, don't you?" And I had nodded like an idiot through my tears. Now I realized something horrifying. She never showed me the actual paperwork. My breathing became shallow as I continued searching through the file. Bank account information. A handwritten note with emergency contacts. Copies of overseas employment records. And beneath all of it, another envelope. This one already opened. Inside was a short letter dated only 6 weeks before Caleb died. "Mom, if Sabrina ever tells you I stopped caring about you, please don't believe that. Sometimes people rewrite love after someone dies because it makes life easier for them." I had to sit down on the concrete floor after reading that. The garage suddenly felt too small for the weight inside my chest. He knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to leave warnings behind like breadcrumbs. I pressed the paper against my lips and closed my eyes. For 2 years, I had mourned my son while slowly accepting the cruel possibility that distance changed him before the end. Now every hidden letter was giving him back to me piece by piece. His humor, his loyalty, his worry, his love. A car door slammed outside. I froze instantly. My heart began pounding so hard I could hear it. Voices drifted faintly from the driveway. Sabrina and Ava. They were home early. For one panicked second, I considered putting everything back exactly as I found it, pretending none of this happened. But then I looked down at Caleb's handwriting again. For mom and kids. No, I had spent 2 years living inside someone else's version of my son. I wasn't doing that anymore. I quickly slid the insurance papers and letters back into the blue file just as footsteps approached the garage door, connecting to the kitchen. Then I heard Sabrina's voice, sharp, confused. Why is the garage open? The door opened before I had time to stand up. Sabrina stopped cold when she saw me sitting on the garage floor beside the open cabinet. For one long second, neither of us spoke. Ava stood behind her, holding a backpack against her chest, her eyes moving nervously between us. Then Sabrina smiled, not warmly, carefully. "Evelyn," she said slowly, "what are you doing out here?" I held the blue file tightly in my lap. Even after everything, part of me still expected her to explain this somehow. To tell me there had been a misunderstanding, that grief had twisted everything into something uglier than it really was. But when Sabrina's eyes landed on the folder, I saw it immediately. Fear. Real fear. It flashed across her face so quickly, most people would have missed it. I didn't. "I came looking for Christmas lights," I said quietly. Her gaze never left the file. The silence stretched. Finally, as he spoke softly, "Mom?" Sabrina turned instantly toward her daughter, and just like that, her expression changed again. Calm, controlled, the polished suburban mother everyone trusted. "Sweetheart, go inside for me," she said gently. "I need to talk to Grandma." Ava hesitated. Then her eyes met mine. I think she already knew something terrible was happening. Still, she nodded slowly and disappeared through the kitchen door. The second she was gone, Sabrina's entire posture shifted. Not dramatic, just colder. "You shouldn't be going through private things," she said quietly. "Private things." I stared at her in disbelief. "My son wrote these letters to me." Her jaw tightened slightly. "You weren't supposed to find those." The words hit harder than shouting ever could. Not apology, not denial, just truth slipping out too quickly. I stood up slowly, my knees aching from the cold concrete floor. "For 2 years, I whispered. "You let me believe Caleb stopped writing to me." Sabrina crossed her arms tightly. It wasn't that simple. I almost laughed then, because betrayal always sounds ridiculous once the lies begin collapsing. "Then explain it to me," I said. For the first time since Caleb died, Sabrina looked genuinely tired. The perfect composure cracked slightly around her eyes. "You have no idea what those last months were like," she said quietly. "He was under enormous pressure. He was paranoid, emotional. He kept obsessing over everybody back home instead of focusing on himself." I stared at her. "He loved his family. He loved guilt," she snapped suddenly. "There's a difference." The garage went silent again. Even the air felt heavier now. Sabrina rubbed her forehead and looked away. "You think I enjoyed any of this?" she asked. "After he died, those letters would have destroyed you." I looked down at the file in my hands. Destroyed me. No, what destroyed me was believing my son slowly disappeared before he died. What destroyed me was sitting alone, every holiday wondering why his silence felt colder near the end. What destroyed me was grieving a lie. "He warned me about this," I said quietly. That got her attention immediately. Her eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" I opened the file carefully and pulled out the final letter. Sabrina's face lost color the second she recognized the red handwriting across the top. "For Mom only." For the first time, her composure completely slipped. "Evelyn," he said. "If I never received those letters," I interrupted softly. "It meant someone made that choice for me." The garage became painfully still. Sabrina looked like she stopped breathing altogether, And suddenly, I understood something important. She never expected Caleb to leave evidence behind. Not emotional evidence, not his own words. Because people can argue with accusations, but they can't argue with handwriting. Tears filled Sabrina's eyes unexpectedly then. Not loud tears, quiet ones. "I was trying to hold this family together," she whispered. I studied her face carefully, and for the first time, I saw something beneath the polished control. Exhaustion, resentment, years of buried anger. "You hated how much he loved me," I said. Her silence answered everything. Outside, sunlight finally pushed through the storm clouds, spilling pale light across the garage floor. Sabrina looked down at the concrete before speaking again. "He always chose you first," she whispered. The words came out small, broken, like something she'd carried alone for years. I closed my eyes briefly. Because suddenly this wasn't just about hidden letters anymore. It was about jealousy, so deep it survived even death. When I opened my eyes again, Sabrina was staring at the blue file with quiet panic. "There are legal documents in there," she said carefully. "The kids don't need confusion right now." There it was. The real fear. Not the letters. The paperwork. I looked back down at Caleb's insurance documents, folded neatly inside the folder. My name, listed clearly beneath his children's. 30%, not forgotten, not erased, intended. "You lied to me," I said quietly. Sabrina's face hardened again. "I did what I thought was necessary. Necessary. Such a clean word for something so cruel." I slipped the file back into my purse slowly. Then I picked up Caleb's spare keys from the cabinet's shelf. Sabrina watched every movement carefully now. For the first time in 2 years, she understood something had changed between us permanently. I wasn't the grieving old woman she could manage anymore. And deep down, she knew it too. Sabrina didn't try to stop me from leaving. That surprised me more than anything else. I thought she would argue. Defend herself harder. Maybe even demand the file back. But instead, she simply stood there in the garage doorway while I walked past her with Caleb's letters pressed tightly against my side. For a brief second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered sitting alone on Christmas morning, reading old text messages from my son. Because I believed there would never be anything else. Again. No. Some wounds sit too deep for sympathy. I drove home slowly with the radio off, both hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. The morning sun had finally broken through the clouds, but everything still felt gray somehow. My entire understanding of the past 2 years had cracked apart in less than 24 hours. And the worst part was realizing how carefully the lie had been built. Not one dramatic deception. 1,000 small ones, carefully placed, repeated gently, until grief itself became controllable. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed someone sitting on my front porch steps. Grant Holloway, Caleb's old friend from overseas. He stood as soon as he saw my car, his tall frame awkward and uncertain beneath a navy windbreaker. I hadn't seen him in almost years. "Mrs. Mercer," he said softly. I nodded slowly. "Grant." Something in my face must have unsettled him immediately. "You okay?" For a moment, I considered lying. Then I remembered Caleb's words. "Don't ignore your instincts just because you love people." "I found his letters," I said quietly. Grant froze, not confused, not surprised, just still, and suddenly my stomach dropped. "You knew," I whispered. He looked away toward the street. "I knew he was writing," he admitted carefully. "I didn't know she kept them from you." The ache inside my chest deepened. "How long?" Grant rubbed the back of his neck slowly before answering. "Pretty much the entire deployment." I closed my eyes briefly. So many people knew pieces of the truth while I sat alone, building excuses for silence that never belonged to my son. Grant followed me inside quietly. We sat at my kitchen table, where Caleb's letters still lay spread beneath the morning light. Grant stared at the handwriting for a long moment before speaking. "He talked about you constantly over there," he said softly. "Honestly, sometimes it drove the rest of us crazy." A weak laugh escaped me through my tears. That sounded like Caleb. Grant picked up one envelope carefully. "He used to get frustrated," he admitted. Said Sabrina hated when he mailed things home. I looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Grant hesitated. Then he sighed heavily. "She thought you depended on him too much." The words stung even though I already knew they were true. Not true about me. True about Sabrina believing it. I stared down at my hands. "I never asked him for anything," I whispered. "I know," Grant said immediately. Caleb knew too. Silence settled over the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed softly in the corner while sunlight crept across the table, inch by inch. Finally, Grant spoke again. "There's something else you should know." A cold feeling moved through me instantly. "What?" He leaned forward carefully. "About 6 months before Caleb died, he tried changing some beneficiary paperwork overseas. My pulse quickened. He said he wanted extra protections in place for you and the kids in case anything happened." The blue file flashed through my mind immediately. 30%. My name. Intended. Grant continued quietly. "He told me Sabrina got angry when she found out." I looked toward the letters again. Every conversation, every hidden document, every warning. They all pointed to the same painful truth now. This wasn't impulsive grief after Caleb died. This had started long before. "She was planning," I whispered. Grant didn't answer right away, and somehow that silence hurt more. Because silence is where truth usually lives once people stop protecting each other. After a while, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. "There's one more thing," he said. Then he placed the phone gently in front of me. It was an old photo. Caleb sitting outdoors somewhere, overseas, smiling tiredly into the camera, while holding a handwritten envelope. My envelope. Across the front, in thick black ink, I saw my own name. Mom. The timestamp in the corner made my chest tighten. 3 weeks before he died. Grant swallowed hard. He asked me personally to make sure that one got mailed. My vision blurred instantly, because suddenly I realized something unbearable. My son died believing I would read these words, believing his love would reach me, and someone stole that from both of us. After Grant left, I sat alone at my kitchen table for nearly an hour without moving. The photo of Caleb remained beside my coffee cup. 3 weeks before he died, smiling into a camera somewhere halfway across the world while holding a letter meant for me. A letter I never received. Grief is strange. Sometimes it arrives like a wave. Other times it arrives quietly, through tiny details that suddenly become unbearable. The curve of someone's handwriting. A familiar expression in a photograph. The realization that your child spent his final months trying desperately to stay connected to you while someone else slowly cut those connections apart. By noon, the house felt too small to contain my thoughts. So I did something I hadn't done since Caleb's funeral. I drove to the cemetery. The military memorial section sat on a hill overlooking the edge of town. Rows of identical white markers stretched across trimmed green grass beneath a pale blue sky. Everything looked peaceful there, too peaceful for the kind of pain buried underneath it. I carried Caleb's final letter in my purse the entire walk. When I reached his grave, I stood quietly for a long time before speaking. "I found them," I whispered. The wind moved softly through the trees above me. I felt ridiculous at first, talking to stone and grass like an old woman losing touch with reality. But grief changes your understanding of silence. After enough loss, silence begins feeling like conversation too. "I found all your letters, sweetheart." My voice cracked slightly then, not because I was falling apart. Because for the first time in 2 years, I no longer felt abandoned by my son. I knelt carefully beside the grave marker and brushed a few fallen leaves away from the base. Caleb Mercer. Beloved father. Beloved son. The dates underneath his name suddenly looked wrong to me now. Too short. Too clean. As if an entire human life could ever fit neatly between two numbers carved into marble. I'm sorry, I whispered. I should've known. Tears slid quietly down my face. Not dramatic tears, just the kind that come when guilt finally loosens its grip enough to let truth breathe. Underneath, my phone buzzed softly inside my purse. A message from Sabrina. We need to discuss the documents. No apology, no mention of the letters. Just documents. I stared at the screen for several seconds before locking the phone again. Even now, she still thought this was about paperwork, money, control. But she still didn't understand the real damage. She stole time. 2 entire years of mourning built on lies. A shadow moved nearby, pulling me gently from my thoughts. An older groundskeeper pushed a maintenance cart slowly along the cemetery road. He nodded politely as he passed. Beautiful afternoon, he said softly. I nodded back automatically. And suddenly I remembered something Caleb once told me after his father died. Most people survive grief by pretending life still looks normal. At the time, I thought he was too young to understand loss properly. Turns out he understood more than I ever did. I sat beside his grave another 20 minutes before finally standing again. My knees ached from the cold ground. Age reminds you of itself constantly in moments like these. As I walked back toward my car, I made a decision. No more quiet confusion. No more letting Sabrina control every conversation. I needed facts now, real ones. An hour later, I found myself sitting across from Walter Pierce in his small downtown law office. Walter had handled some estate paperwork after Caleb died. A quiet man in his 70s with silver eyebrows and the kind of careful voice people instinctively trusted. He looked genuinely surprised to see me. Mrs. Mercer, he said warmly. Everything all right? I placed the blue file carefully onto his desk. His expression changed immediately. Where did you get this? In Caleb's garage cabinet. Walter removed his glasses slowly. Then he noticed the letters. For a long moment, he said nothing at all. Finally, he sighed heavily. I wondered when this would surface. A cold feeling settled into my stomach. You knew too? Walter shook his head quickly. Not about the letters. He paused. But Caleb contacted me shortly before his final deployment. I gripped the edge of the chair tightly. He was worried, Walter continued carefully. Mostly about making sure you and the children would be protected financially if something happened to him. There it was again. Protected, intended, planned. Not forgotten. Walter opened the insurance paperwork and frowned. These beneficiary copies are original filings, he said quietly. But this isn't what I received after his death. My heartbeat slowed painfully. What do you mean? Walter looked up at me over his glasses. The final documents, submitted to the insurance company, listed only the children. The room went completely silent. I stared at him without breathing. Because, suddenly, another terrifying possibility entered my mind. The letters weren't the only thing Sabrina may have hidden. I left Walter Pierce's office, feeling like the ground beneath my life had shifted again. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across downtown, but I barely noticed anything around me. Cars passed. People crossed streets carrying coffee cups and grocery bags. Normal life continued moving forward, while my entire past kept rearranging itself piece by piece. The final insurance documents listed only the children, not me. Not the percentages Caleb specifically wrote down himself. I sat inside my car, gripping the steering wheel for several minutes before starting the engine. One question kept circling inside my mind. Who changed the paperwork? And another question followed right behind it. Did Caleb know someone might try? The thought made my chest ache, because suddenly, All those hidden letters felt less like memories and more like warnings left behind by a man running out of time. My phone buzzed again. This time, the message was shorter. We need to settle this privately. Privately. I stared at those words for a long moment. That was always her way. Quiet control, no scenes, no public conflict. Everything handled behind closed doors, where truth could be softened into something easier to manage. But I wasn't interested in protecting comfort anymore. I drove home slowly as evening settled across town. The second I opened my front door, I heard voices inside my kitchen. Ava and Mason. I froze in the hallway. For a split-second, panic rushed through me. Then Ava appeared around the corner, holding one of my casserole dishes. "Grandma," she said carefully. "We brought dinner." Behind her, Mason stood awkwardly, clutching a grocery bag full of rolls and paper plates. The sight nearly broke my heart, because children always end up carrying pieces of wars they never started. "What are you two doing here?" I asked softly. Ava glanced toward the driveway nervously. "Mom's still at work." Something in her tone told me that wasn't the full story. I stepped aside quietly and let them in. The kitchen suddenly felt warmer with them there. Mason immediately started unpacking food while Ava hovered near the table. Like she wanted to say something, but didn't know how. Finally, she looked at me directly. "You found Dad's letters, didn't you?" I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. Ava's eyes filled instantly. "She lied to you."
"She lied, Fred,"
she whispered. Hearing it spoken aloud by Caleb's daughter somehow made everything more real than ever. I pulled her gently into my arms. And for a moment, she stayed completely still before finally collapsing against me. 14-year-olds try so hard to be older than they are until grief reminds them they're still children. "I knew something was wrong," she whispered against my shoulder. "Mom always got angry whenever I asked about Dad." I closed my eyes tightly. Mason looked between us in confusion from the kitchen counter. "What's happening?" he asked quietly. Neither of us answered immediately. Because how do you explain betrayal to a 10-year-old boy who already lost his father? Ava pulled away slowly and wiped her eyes. "There's more stuff in the attic," she admitted softly. "Boxes Mom didn't want us touching." A cold feeling moved through me again. "What kind of boxes?" She said they were private. Private, that word again. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table, while Ava lowered her voice further. "A few months ago, I heard her arguing on the phone," she said. She kept saying, "If Evelyn sees those papers, everything changes." My heartbeat slowed. Papers, not letters. Papers. Walter's words echoed inside my head immediately. The final documents submitted to the insurance company listed only the children. I looked toward Caleb's blue file, still resting inside my purse. Something bigger sat underneath all this. Something planned. Mason finally spoke again from across the room. "Mom cries when she thinks nobody sees hers." The room fell silent. Children notice everything, even contradictions. Especially contradictions. I swallowed carefully. "Your mother loved your father," I said quietly. And strangely enough, I believed that. That was what made everything harder. Sabrina's betrayal didn't come from simple cruelty. It came from possessiveness, fear, resentment left untreated too long, love twisted into control. Ava sat beside me slowly. "She's scared," she whispered. I looked at her. "How do you know?" Ava hesitated. "Because she asked me this morning if you seemed angry. Not sad, not hurt. Angry." I leaned back slowly in my chair. For 2 years, Sabrina controlled the story. Because she believed grief made me weak. Now, she was beginning to realize grief had finally turned into something else. Clarity. The kitchen clock ticked softly while evening sunlight faded through the curtains. Then Ava reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out a small silver key. "I think this goes to Dad's filing cabinet upstairs," she whispered. "Mom keeps it hidden in her jewelry box." I stared at the key resting in her palm. Small, ordinary. and somehow heavy enough to change everything again. I didn't use the key that night. Part of me wanted to. Part of me wanted to drive straight back to Sabrina's house, unlock every drawer she'd hidden from me, and drag every secret into the light before she had time to prepare another lie. But Caleb's letters had already taught me something important. Truth reveals itself best when people still believe they're in control. So I waited. The next morning, Sabrina called before 9. "I think we should talk," she said carefully. Her voice sounded calm, but underneath it, I heard exhaustion. The strain of someone holding too many things together at once. I stood at my kitchen sink, staring out at the gray morning sky. "About what?" I asked quietly. A long pause followed. "The documents." Again with the documents. Never the letters. Never Caleb. Just paperwork. "We can talk tonight," I said. Sabrina exhaled softly, almost relieved. "At the house?" "Yes. After we hung up." I opened one of Caleb's letters and read it slowly, while drinking coffee that had already gone cold. "Mom, sometimes silence tells you more about people than words ever will." I folded the paper carefully afterward. Because he was right. Sabrina's silence about certain things had become louder than anything she actually said. That evening, I arrived just after sunset. The house looked warm from outside. Kitchen lights glowing softly. Television flickering somewhere deeper inside. A completely ordinary suburban evening. But ordinary things always hide the sharpest betrayals. Sabrina opened the door before I knocked. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely worn down. No perfect makeup. No polished smile. Just tired eyes and tension around her mouth. "The kids are upstairs?" she said quietly. I nodded and stepped inside. The familiar smell of vanilla candles and laundry detergent filled the hallway. For a brief second, memories rushed through me so fast it hurt. Thanksgiving dinners. Birthday cakes. Caleb laughing beside the staircase while carrying wrapping paper at Christmas. A whole life lived inside walls that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Sabrina led me into the dining room. 2 glasses of water waited on the table already. Prepared, carefully staged. I sat down slowly, while she remained standing for a moment, before finally taking the chair across from me. Neither of us spoke right away. Then Sabrina looked directly at me. "You told Walter Pierce, not a question." I folded my hands calmly in my lap. "He told me the insurance documents were changed after Caleb died." Sabrina's face tightened instantly. "It wasn't illegal." The speed of her answer told me more than the words themselves. I stared at her quietly. "So you did change them." She looked down at the table. "I adjusted paperwork to simplify things for the kids." Simplify. Such harmless-sounding language for something so devastating. I felt strangely calm suddenly. Maybe because the worst part had already happened the moment I found Caleb's letters. After that, everything else simply became confirmation. "He wanted me included," I said softly. Sabrina rubbed her forehead tiredly. "He wasn't thinking clearly near the end." I reached into my purse and placed the photo grant, showed me onto the table between us. Caleb smiling overseas while holding my letter. Sabrina's breath caught instantly. For a long moment she just stared at it. Then her shoulders slowly lowered, like something inside her had finally become too heavy to carry anymore. "You have no idea what it was like after he died," she whispered. I said nothing. Because grief does not excuse cruelty. She looked toward the dark kitchen doorway before continuing. "Everyone treated me like some grieving widow who needed protecting," she said quietly. "But nobody understood what I lived with before that." I studied her face carefully. Years ago, I probably would have interrupted, tried comforting her, tried finding middle ground. Not anymore. Sabrina swallowed hard. "He called you constantly," she whispered. "Every problem. Every fear, every homesick moment. It was always you. There it was again. The wound underneath everything. Jealousy, not loud jealousy. quiet jealousy. The kind that grows slowly over years until love itself begins feeling like competition. "He was my son," I said carefully. "And he was my husband," Sabrina answered immediately. Silence filled the room. Upstairs, I heard Mason laughing faintly at something on television. The ordinary sound made everything downstairs feel even sadder somehow. Because families rarely collapse all at once, they erode quietly, conversation by conversation, resentment by resentment. "I never wanted to erase you," Sabrina whispered finally. I looked at her for a very long time before answering. "But you did." Tears filled her eyes again. Real ones this time. Not performance. Not manipulation. Just exhaustion meeting truth. Then I reached slowly into my purse and placed Caleb's final letter on the table. The one marked in red, for Mom only. Sabrina stared at it like it might explode. "He knew," I said softly. Her face went pale. And for the first time since this began, my daughter-in-law looked truly afraid of what came next. Sabrina didn't touch the letter. She just stared at it sitting between us on the dining room table. Her face drained of color beneath the warm overhead light. "For Mom only." Caleb's handwriting filled the room more loudly than either of our voices ever could. "You read it already?" she asked quietly. "Yes." Her eyes closed, briefly. Outside, headlights moved past the front windows as neighbors returned home from work. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once before falling silent again. Ordinary suburban sounds, the kind that continue no matter what truth is unraveling inside someone's house. Finally, Sabrina spoke. "What exactly did he say about me?" I looked at her for a long moment before answering. "He said if I never received the letters, someone made that choice for me." The words landed heavily between us. Sabrina lowered her eyes immediately. Not denial, not outrage. Just guilt too exhausted to keep fighting. I leaned back slowly in my chair. "For 2 years," I said quietly, "I thought my son stopped loving me before he died." Sabrina shook her head quickly. "No, but you let me believe it." Tears slipped down her face then. Real tears, not loud ones. The kind people cry when they finally run out of explanations. Upstairs, footsteps creaked softly across the hallway. Ava. I knew it before she even appeared at the staircase entrance. She stood there halfway between childhood and adulthood, gripping the railing tightly while looking down at both of us. Neither Sabrina nor I spoke immediately. Then Ava's eyes landed on the letters scattered across the table. Her face changed instantly. "Oh my God," she whispered. Sabrina stood up too quickly. "Ava, go upstairs." "No." The word came out sharper than I'd ever heard from her before. Sabrina froze. Ava looked directly at her mother, tears already forming. "You lied to Grandma?" The silence that followed felt endless. Mason appeared behind his sister, wearing pajama pants and holding a video game controller. His small face shifted nervously, as he sensed tension without fully understanding it. "What's happening?" he asked quietly. No one answered him right away. Because sometimes the hardest part of betrayal isn't discovering the truth. It's watching innocence disappear from people you love. Sabrina pressed both hands against the edge of the dining table, like she suddenly needed help. Standing. "I was trying to protect this family," she whispered. Ava stared at her in disbelief. By hiding Dad's letters, Sabrina's breathing became uneven. "You don't understand what things were like near the end." "Then explain it," Ava said. The room went completely still. I watched Sabrina carefully then. Because for the first time since Caleb died, she no longer controlled the story. Not with me. Not with the children. Not even with herself anymore. Finally, she sat back down slowly. "He was changing overseas," she whispered. "Everything became about fear and guilt, and worrying constantly about home, about your grandmother, about everyone except himself." I listened quietly, not because I agreed. Because I wanted the children to hear the truth directly. Sabrina wiped her eyes shakily. He would call your grandmother for hours sometimes, she continued. Even on anniversaries, holidays, family trips. Ava looked confused. So? One simple word. So small, so devastating. Because children still believe love can exist without competition. Sabrina looked toward her daughter helplessly. I was his wife, she whispered, and there it was. The entire tragedy sitting naked in the middle of the room. Not greed first, not paperwork first, resentment first. Years of it, quiet and patient, growing beneath ordinary family dinners and holiday photographs, until eventually, even a grieving mother became someone to erase. Mason looked between all of us with frightened eyes. Did Dad still love Grandma? He asked softly. The question shattered something inside the room. Sabrina covered her mouth immediately and began crying harder. But I answered him before she could speak. Yes, I said gently. Very much. Mason nodded slowly, like he needed that truth more than anything else. Ava stepped closer to the table then, staring down at Caleb's handwriting. You kept these from her for 2 years, she whispered. Sabrina couldn't even meet her daughter's eyes anymore. I thought it would make things easier. Easier. That word again. People destroy so much while trying to make life easier. I looked at the children standing there, beneath the soft dining room lights, and suddenly felt very tired. Not angry anymore. Just tired. Because no matter what happened next, this family would never fully return to what it had been before tonight. Ava quietly picked up one of Caleb's unopened envelopes from the table. Her fingers traced his handwriting carefully. Then she looked at her mother with tears running silently down her face. You stole our last pieces of Dad too, she whispered. Sabrina broke completely after that. Not dramatically. Not screaming. Just quiet sobbing from someone finally forced to sit inside the full weight of what they'd done. And for the first time in 2 years, nobody in the room tried protecting her from it. Nobody spoke for a long time after that. The house felt different now. Not louder, quieter, like the truth itself had settled into the walls and furniture, leaving everyone too exhausted to pretend anymore. Ava eventually led Mason upstairs, while Sabrina remained sitting at the dining room table, staring at Caleb's letters scattered beneath the overhead light. Her mascara had smeared slightly, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked less like the perfectly composed woman from neighborhood parties and school fundraisers. She looked human, broken people usually do. I slowly gathered the letters back into their box one by one. Caleb's handwriting covered nearly every envelope. Some were stained from dust. Others still sealed after 2 years of silence. 2 years. So much grief wasted on lies. When I reached for the final red-marked letter, Sabrina finally spoke. I did love him. Her voice sounded small, not defensive anymore, just tired. I nodded quietly because I believed her. That was the tragedy of it all. Sabrina had loved Caleb deeply. But somewhere along the way, love turned possessive, fearful, competitive. She stopped seeing his relationship with me as family and began seeing it as something threatening. And fear, when left alone long enough, becomes cruelty without people even noticing it happen. I know you loved him, I said softly. Fresh tears filled her eyes. But love isn't supposed to erase other people. The room went silent again. She lowered her head and cried quietly into her hands, while I closed the box of letters carefully beside me. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel angry at Caleb anymore. That realization hit me unexpectedly. I had spent so long carrying confusion beneath my grief that I never noticed how much resentment had slowly attached itself to my mourning. Resentment toward missed calls, toward distance, toward silence. I thought my son chose himself, but he never chose it. He fought against it until the very end, and somehow that truth gave me peace, even inside all the heartbreak. I stood slowly and reached for my coat. Sabrina looked up immediately. "What happens now?" she whispered. Such a fragile question. I thought about it carefully before answering. "Now we stop lying to each other." She nodded, through tears. I picked up the box of letters and moved toward the front door. Halfway there, I paused beside the staircase wall at Piazzas, where family photos stretched upward in matching frames. Caleb at 12, holding a baseball glove. Caleb graduating college. Caleb smiling beside Sabrina on their wedding day. And farther up, one photo of all of us together during Thanksgiving years ago. Before deployments. Before resentment. Before silence settled into places where love used to live. We looked happy. Maybe we truly were back then. Some losses happened suddenly. Others happened slowly, enough that nobody notices until years later. Outside, cold night air greeted me as I stepped onto the porch. The neighborhood was quiet, except for distant traffic, and wind moving softly through trees. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Ava. She wrapped her arms around me tightly before I even turned around. "Grandma," she whispers shakily. "Please don't disappear too." My heart nearly broke. I held her close and kissed the top of her head gently. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart." And for the first time since Caleb died, I realized something important. Sabrina may have hidden my son's words, but she never truly took away the love he left behind. 3 months later, I moved into a small cottage near the coast, about 40 minutes outside town. Nothing fancy. Just white curtains, a tiny back porch, and enough space for peace to finally breathe again. I brought Caleb's letters with me. Every single one. Some mornings, I sit outside with coffee and read them, while listening to waves crash against the rocks below the bluff. I know nearly every line by heart now. His jokes, his worries, his terrible descriptions of overseas food, the way he always ended every letter the same way. "Love you, Mom." Sabrina and I speak occasionally now, carefully, honestly. Some wound scenes never fully heal, but honesty at least gives them air instead of darkness. The children visit often, especially Ava. Last week she helped me frame one of Caleb's old photographs for the living room wall. The same photo Grant showed me. Caleb smiling overseas while holding the letter addressed to me. Sometimes I still stare at that picture for long minutes at a time. Not because it hurts anymore, because it reminds me of something grief almost stole from me forever. My son never stopped loving me. Someone only tried to hide the proof. And if you're listening to my story tonight while carrying grief of your own, let me tell you something I wish I'd understood sooner. Silence is not always abandonment. Sometimes love is still trying to reach you, even when someone else stands in the way. Looking back now, I realize grief becomes even heavier when silence and lies are wrapped around it. For 2 years, I thought my son's love had faded, when in truth, someone else had been standing between us the entire time. The entire time. I learned that real love does not ask people to compete for it, and that hidden resentment can quietly destroy a family long before anyone notices. But I also learned something stronger than betrayal. The truth has a way of surviving, especially when it's written by someone who truly loved you.